Every day, we're surrounded by information. Breaking news, headlines, push notifications, experts, analysts, footage from the other side of the world. And we consume it almost instantly. But here's the uncomfortable question. How much of what we're seeing is actually the truth? And how much is the story someone wants us to believe? Because most of us aren't there. We're not walking the streets. We're not talking to the people living through it. We're not sitting across from the soldiers or commanders involved. We're watching a screen. And that screen is giving us a perspective. Maybe it's accurate. Maybe parts of it aren't. Maybe there's context we're not getting. And maybe sometimes there's a narrative being shaped before we ever have a chance to question it. So how do we know what to believe? How do we separate facts from framing? And in a world where everyone seems to have their own version of the truth, who gets to tell the story? Today, we're getting into media, war, information, and the uncomfortable space between what actually happened and what we're told happened. Let's get into it.
Welcome to Art of Words, where language is strategy and every word has consequences.
I think we need to really think about what the motivation behind that is. I mean, I think motivation initially maybe was newsworthiness, right? If they frame a certain way, people are more interested or get incited or have a stronger reaction. Then, obviously news gets, passed around and then spread and then they have higher rating, in TV. But now the news media has been bought by a lot of bigger corporations. They're controlled by a lot of political parties or party backers. I think there's a sometimes bigger, motivation to create certain news channels. I think initially we all know when they divided Los Angeles by freeways, it was intended to be segregation, keep the blacks in the South and keep whites in the, whatever central area in Beverly Hills and coastal area. And then whatever it is,
Still like that.
because of that, freeway formation, but I think that has a lot to do with it but this is what I see having, kind of looking at, because there's so much information available online and you could take it from the left, right, middle, whatever it is, but there's always a motivation, whether what group you represent or you identify yourself with, the people who are basically feeding that information to you are not always innocent, even if it's race driven. Like I am.
You saying the newspapers are racist?
Oh, definitely are. They were more racist back then, and I think it's not in the racist issue. They want racial division.
Yeah, they want the tension because it's newsworthy.
Exactly. CNN has the highest rating ever because Donald Trump is the president.
Yeah.
It's the opposite effect. They do the exactly opposite of what they say they want to do,
But I mean, isn't it weird? Like when you were a kid, did you ever think that the news that you were hearing was not?
No, we never doubted. Of course not.
Yeah, you just took like, oh, it's coming from the news. Like it must be like neutral and accurate, right?
Of course not.
People forget though that the news sells sensationalism,
Yes.
right? They don't sell accuracy.
Right.
I don't know when that shift occurred because I want to say like in the 80s, it didn't feel that way, right? It seemed like the news was there to provide you with accurate information.
I think it is the difficulty of gathering information that made it more truthful before, meaning you had to send out a reporter who does journalism, actual investigation, talking to people. Now, I'm not bashing Fox News, but Fox News started this trend. They had zero reporters when they started. All they did is they gather news from other channels and they'll have pundits and then they will spit it and they'll spit it out, right? And then they made it seem like it's some kind of a news, right? Even if it was unverified, they didn't have a journalists going out or reporters going out to investigate. And now we have internet, we have, social media. It is so easy to gather information. Segmented information. Now you have an AI, you could spin anything. You have a footage of some demonstration somewhere in Iran, you could, frame it as whatever you want, Now people who have an opinion about it will either have a stronger opinion, or, start saying that, oh, that's doctored, or that's altered, So I think even on a racial division, like I said, it is advantageous for people who basically wants racial conflict to continue that so they get funding too. They get a lot of funding, like these, you know, um, groups who represent, certain minorities, they get a lot of funding. And I think the question we have to always ask, what is their motivation? They could be altruistic.
Funding.
Yeah.
That's it.
No, but they could have an altruistic reason. They really believe in, whatever justice and equality for, the group of people. It is true, but would they do that, if there was no funding?
Would they do it to that extreme level?
Exactly. And if they really wanted to achieve peace and then bridge some kind of a relationship, like, would they remain relevant? If that really happened, none of them will be relevant anymore. If you think about it.
But, that being fair, right? Because we all know it. These news channels, these newspapers, whatever, like they're a business, right? They got to make revenue, right? They have employees. They got to pay the employees to support their families. But the question is like, at what cost?
Yeah.
Right? Because initially when they create a story and they're just like, oh, how do we spin this to make this more sensational? How do we get people more shocked and stunned so they'll tune in? I don't think they necessarily think about the waterfall effects, right? Because like what it will bring up to me is like COVID, right? Then all of a sudden, like, who attacked a lot of Asian Americans? Like most of the attacks on Asian Americans, it seemed like, I could be wrong on this. I didn't look at this factual like summary of this, but it seemed like there was a lot of attacks by African Americans on Asian Americans, right? And it was like, well, where does that stem from, right? You don't think some of those attacks, those people were thinking about stuff like, oh, Latasha Harkins, Rick Chow now, right? Like they're adding that into the fold, and then they're finding justifications for their actions, right? But it's like these stories are only in their head because the media sensationalized one incident and made it try to seem like it was applicable to like the entire groups of people, right?
But if you think about it, people who are feeding the information to, that particular group of people, it doesn't help them or make them any better by basically feeding that kind of false information and inciting them, right? It's not the African Americans who are necessarily feeding African Americans that information or hatred, towards Asian Americans. It is actually probably, majority or people who benefit from minorities having conflict and not basically elevating themselves into majority, shares.
Oh, who is that though?
Yeah, I mean
Who is that?
I think that's
No, because what you said is a good point right there. Like, who would benefit from keeping minorities out of the majority, or just to say it more plainly, keeping minorities out of positions of power?
or within conflict of each other.
Well, if you keep them in conflict, then you separate, right?
Yeah,
It's a whole separate,
exactly.
divide and conquer,
we
right?
can, we
Yeah.
can.
But think about it. I mean, this is tongue in cheek. Imagine if you took what people tend to think is like the smartest group and you combine them with the group that people tend to think is the most physically strongest. Imagine if you put those two groups together, like how much power could they potentially like control, right? Like I'm just saying, like so you think like if the system is thinking about how to control groups, then I definitely can't let them start working together, right? Because then one group gets the strength of two. And then synergistically, if they have certain strengths that the other one doesn't, and they start shoring up strengths and weaknesses, I'm going to create a monster that maybe I can no longer actually like oppress, right? So, I mean, in my head, I just think about like all of these places around the country, because sometimes we forget we're in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is a weird place.
It is a weird place.
We think in LA, we think everyone else
don't
is
know the
weird.
rest.
Yeah, we think that everybody else is weird. Not true. We are weird, right? We have so much diversity of not just belief, religion, ethnicity, nationality, right? socioeconomic status. We have so much diversity that we don't really know what it's like to live in more homogenous areas. But
Right.
most of the country is more homogenous,
Yes.
right? They don't have all of our, like all of these different groups of people. So like, I just think about like, oh yeah, when I was in the military, and then it's the first time I meet all these people from these, places I've never heard of, right? Like some of them were from rural Washington State, or like some people are from, the Bible Belt, or like really small towns that they didn't really have any Asians. Really, some of them didn't have any like, blacks or Hispanics or whatever, So like, when you interact with them, you'll see like a lot of the stuff that they say and do, whatever, it's not out of racism, right?
No, it's not.
It's just because
Out of ignorance. Yeah.
they just don't know. I don't even want to say ignorance because it sounds negative, right? It's just like they have an interest. I mean, you can't, like, let's say I grew up in the middle of Oklahoma, right? Because my parents went, like, I don't have a choice,
Yeah.
right? I'm 4 years old. Like, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to learn what's in my environment. Like, I'm going to obviously have certain perspectives and
Yeah.
I'm going to lack certain knowledge, right? I didn't really know the extent of that, right? Until I intermingled with them, right? But really quickly, I realized that, like, we get over that stuff so fast.
Yeah.
Just after a short period of
Yeah.
time, especially after, like, group suffering, like, it doesn't even matter. Like, everyone's like the same, right? Like, everyone just becomes a brother, right? Everyone's your brother. It doesn't matter. I don't even know where all these guys come from anymore. Like, we just all act alike. It doesn't really matter. They had initial questions, right? Like, I remember this one guy was like, he was a guy in my unit, right? He was one of my guys. And we were like at an Asian buffet. And he was like, can I ask you a question? And I could just see in his eyes, I was like, he was from Ohio. And I remember I was just like,
Ohio is pretty diverse too.
yeah, but he was
Sort
in like a small town,
Okay.
Ohio. So he's the kind of guy, like, he had the Ohio State on his forearm, like
he's a
tattooed,
Buckeye. Okay.
but he didn't go to Ohio State. He didn't go to college. Okay, like, that's how much of a Ohio representative he was. But I was like, just go ahead. What do you want to ask? And he was like, why do you guys love to eat noodles so much? I can't even remember what I specifically said to him, but it was like, I probably said, hey, this is just like the culinary pairing, right? To like meat and vegetables, right? Like everybody has some kind of carbohydrate pairing, right? Like, I don't know, maybe in the West, right? Like it was bread, right? And then, it could be rice in the East, but then certain parts in the Far East, they're eating noodles, right? It's just like, that's just the way it is, Like, it's not that big of a deal,
Right.
But like, he didn't know that, right? So for him, it would be like,
Little does he know,
He was-
Italians eat more pasta than Asian people do. But
yeah, I forgot which came first. Because I think they got noodles from
China.
the Silk Road.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, like he didn't mean anything like with ill intent, right?
Yeah,
It was
of
just like he
course.
didn't know. So
Just
that like,
genuine curiosity.
so sometimes, so sometimes you start with a blank slate.
Yeah.
But this is where it becomes dangerous. I think from those things, from the blank slate, then when the media just does whatever it wants for the sake of money, for the sake of notoriety, for the sake of ratings and viewership, I think they failed their responsibility to society, right? Because they're just looking at the bottom line, the most base aspect, right, of our human existence. Like, they don't care that it actually has ramifications. Because I mean, I want to say this to people who might be looking at this and they don't have any idea about like race relations or, how the Asian community feels about the Black community, right? Like being in an area that has a lot of diversity, having grown up in Los Angeles, it was like, obviously when I was younger, problems, I was in a gang. And this gang, it has historical ties to like one of the largest Hispanic gangs, right? Like the one of the oldest in Los Angeles. But at some point, there was a faction that came out and that was mostly Asian, right? So most of the people were Asian. Well, here's the thing about it. Here's the funny thing about it is I got in because of my Black friends, okay? the guy was black, right? He was black, but
He was in an Asian gang.
he was in an Asian gang with Hispanic
Hispanics.
lineage.
They're very diverse.
But he was so respected, right? Because obviously he was a real stand-up guy, right? Like he never let anybody, do anything that was disrespectful to himself or others, right, around him. And actually, I would say like back then in LA, it was weird, right? Like the gang culture was really big, right? So like some of the more well-known and, notorious gangs, like those guys had their own crews, right? They were like, like celebrities, So like they had their own little hangout kickback crews. And a lot of times the people from those crews would end up matriculating like into the gang, right? Like if they were deemed whatever, like capable, whatever. So I was part of his kickback crew. He had so many people, right? And they were so mixed, right? Like mostly it was Asian, right? So like, and then later on, like once I was inside, right, the gang and mixed in, like we had black members, we had white guys, we had Middle Eastern, like we had Persian
guys.
guys.
The UN of gang.
No, we had Armenians. No, I swear to God, like we had obviously a bunch of Hispanics, right? Because that's our lineage. We had, an Asians represented from like Koreans, we had Chinese, we had Filipinos.
Wow.
Like, so we had all of these people. And I tell you what, because obviously we were just one particular clique of the gang. And I might be biased, but we were so strong because of that diversity. Because we had all of these people from all over, right? Like we had like Italian guys, like even within the specific like demographic, I swear, like we had Italian guys, we had like Irish guys. And you know what? In the end, like we were all like brothers. I didn't give a crap anyone's background, you know what I mean? Like I never felt any different from them. And I don't think they felt different from me, right? Like in the end, like my black brothers, like in that particular gang, like if anyone messed with them, like they mess with me immediately.
You're not endorsing the gang culture.
No, I'm just, of course, like not, but I'm just saying as a like organization, like even though like he's black, like the media seemed like they want to put out there like there's tension, but that guy was like my brother, right? If someone messed with him or had problems with him, they immediately have problems with me. Whether you're Asian or whatever, right? Like I didn't give a crap, right? Like you immediately had problems with me. So it's not about our nationality or ethnicity. It was always about like the common cause. Like what were we seeking to do, right? Like we were loyal to one thing, really loyal to each other, right? For probably an unproductive cause, but it really saw through all color lines and stuff, right? And like, I don't think that ever gets talked about. What I see on television and movies and stuff, like you'll see gangs, right? And you'll see like some black gangs, right? You'll see the Rolling 60s and, you'll see like, Venice Shoreline, whatever, Pyru, right? Blood, Crips, whatever. And they're like mostly all black. Once in a while, you'll see some, maybe a Hispanic white person on it. But the media tends to show them as all being homogenous, right? And then you'll see like MS or 18th Street, and they're just all Hispanic, right? Or they'll show you like Asian boys, like some of the Asian gangs, and they're like all Asian. So it seems like, oh my God, it's such a racial divide. But it's not all like that, right? I think the vast majority of, and I just don't mean gangs, but like other, like back in the day, like there was racing crews, there was dancing crews, there was party crews. I think a whole bunch of them, a significant amount, were completely mixed, right? They had white, black, Asian, Hispanic, like Middle Eastern, like just all over. Everyone was being represented and no one cared about what your background was, right? As long as you were interested in what we were interested in, like you were good.
That's what I said always. The people, if they got to know each other, it would be hard to be a racist. Racists are usually only racist because they don't know any other race. They have never had an encounter. They've rarely had any kind of a close relationship with any other race. It's not always by choice, like you said, it's how you're born. When you're born into a community, that are all white, and then you hung out with only white people because you never had anyone else, and then you felt like you had to protect that group. Even if there may not be a gang, but you had the gang-like mentality. Hey, we don't want any outsiders because they consider everyone else outsiders, outside of whoever they know and they associate themselves with. They didn't know there was a bigger world. I think that world is changing because of internet and social media. People are still realizing, and there are a lot more people who are trying other things because they realize there's some interest, values, whatever they are after. That's changing. But sort of the same line, the World Cup was this year in US, Canada, Mexico. It was so longest World Cup ever. It's a month, almost month and a half, close to it. 48 teams. I was really against it because, I was criticized, like, what do you want the 12 other teams that's, subpar? Like, why do you want to watch those games? Because I know they're going to suck. I was wrong because it's pretty good. This was the most entertaining World Cup, I think they ever had. They had
Who are the 12 additional teams?
So you can't just name names, but there were 8 teams that never been to the final stages of World
Yeah.
Cup, which is this. Cape Verde, DR Congo, you had Uzbekistan, you had a bunch of other countries who's never been to the stage. Haiti came for the first time. That small country. Cape Verde has 500,000
Where is Cape Verde?
in Africa. They have 5.
So you just named 3 African countries. So
Well-
of those 12, were there a whole bunch of them from the African continent?
Because they gave them more seeds. Now, because it's confederation by continent. So you have more seeds basically to come in from, because Asia only had 5, now they increased to 8.5. So you have 3 more Asian teams come. And then you
How
have,
do they determine those 12?
no, they had the preliminary. So they have to fight within they have to have the preliminary qualification.
So is there an
Within there.
African?
Yeah. So it's the African Football Confederation, AFC. So they basically are their own, it's not, they don't belong to FIFA, but FIFA obviously has relationship with a bunch of other football federation from other continent. So they have to go through their qualification stage long too. Like qualification for World Cup is 2 years. You compete for 2 years to come to the finals. So Cape Verde is 500,000 people, population-wise. And they basically almost beat Argentina. They tied with Spain 0-0. They only lost 1 game. They went to the round of 16.
But they were probably in a killer group,
Oh,
right?
no,
Because they're low seed.
exactly. But they survived. Then they went to the next round of 32, and made it to round.
But FIFA, you can't trust it. Like,
But
is that
my point
legitimate?
in talking about this is how FIFA manipulates certain games. Maybe not fixing it, but manipulate certain games to make sure you still have big names coming into the finals. Otherwise, like, who's gonna watch Cape Verde against DR Congo? Unless you really like, their football. Unless you knew some players, like, you don't usually, rating will be low. So what they did was, so they made Argentina their darling. Argentina was last World Cup, 2022. Messi finally got his, and then everyone still loved Messi, because Messi is like football, hero right now. So they wanted Messi to win one more and exit, gracefully. That's his last dance. So Argentina got a lot of favorable calls. That's how they manipulated. Because, they have VAR. They could actually watch, by, after the play happens, they could review the play to either, penalize or whatever, make further decisions on questionable calls. So they intended to use the VAR to be fair, but now they're using the VAR to actually manipulate the game even more, because they could call out things that are questionable and then in favor of the teams that they actually want to make sure they move on. So my point is, Argentina was the dark. Argentina, everyone loved Argentina too, except me. I mean, it's not, I don't hate Argentina, but I think they won last year. It's like, why do we need to favor them? They're the champion. They should have their own way. They struggled a lot. They allowed a lot of goals, but they somehow end up winning at the last minute almost every single time. And then they basically put a lot of teams. So when I was watching the broadcast, this American broadcast, there innate bias against, certain teams like that has mixed race. France has 11 out of 9 out of 11 players, black, basically, African friends that plays in the team. English has like half, because, and then because I belong to this Tuesday soccer, we play soccer on Tuesday, but we post, right? We start posting like their opinions. And one guy said, oh, they're not France, because, like they're
Yeah.
not playing
They're
fair.
saying their like ancestry is not French.
Yeah. They're not fair because they have
All these bringers.
yeah, they have bringers. That's what he was insinuating. Like, why do they have, so many, and not only him, but there's internet memes about like how these players are not, French, but those 9 players they're pointing out, they're born in France. They're naturally born in France. Their parents may have,
They're saying the cultural heritage
Yeah.
is not French.
Yeah.
That's
and because then I told him, colonialism is a bitch because you basically made all these African countries your colonies,
yeah.
and then you had to give them French, citizenship at some point. English is the same. A lot of these countries that you colonialized, and then you end
But
up
it helped them.
Well, that's now
It helped them.
now people are saying, oh, World Cup wasn't like that in the 1980s. It was kind of competition between different race and different
They
ethnicities.
like that. How
They-
they want race battle.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. And not only that, it's in, like I said, it's undertone, all these broadcasters when they're commentating, I don't think they realize, but sometimes they're favoring teams with one ethnicity. Like they're making comments like, oh, they're, I don't know, but there's particular words they use. And then someone actually made a footage of these commentators making comments when black players are playing well. They use certain words to describe their, whatever, achievement. But when white players are playing, they use little softer words to describe, what
Yeah.
they're doing. This is innate racism, not racism, but just how they're thinking about
What's bias?
bias. Yeah. How
Unintentional, right? Subconscious. bias.
unintentional, of course. And that'll annoy
Maybe.
that'll annoy the hell out of me too, because like Argentina by culture, they don't have a single color person, person of color, because historically they basically made it a policy to oust all the non-whites. They consider themselves as Europeans. And they basically don't have any player. Think about it. Argentina is in the middle of, South America, Brazil has a lot of mixed,
Yeah.
different color. Every other team does, even Norway and like 3 or 4, non-white players. But Argentina had none, and so all these media is concentrating on the fact, on the England versus Argentina game, the Battle of Falkland, long time
Yeah.
ago when, in 1970s or 80s, they had a war about this, the island off the Argentina. So they wanted to make that an issue, and then they try to keep on pumping people like this is, those players consider this as a continuation Battle of Falkland, and players bought into that. Argentina beat England, and then there's some fans who brought, these signs in Spanish saying that, they don't call it Falkland, they call it some other words. It's Argentinian. And then players took that and then basically walking around with it too, bought into it and became a whole controversy. But when you do that, you are actually banned for the next match. You can't do that because there's a political statement and FIFA is against it. But you know what they do? They let them get away with it. Going back again, Balogun, the American player, about the red card. The one of the American
Trump
players.
stepped in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People think that Trump reversed the red card. He didn't. What they did was they gave him a year, basically, to fulfill the suspension. So he still has to fulfill the suspension. They didn't, cancel the red card. That's even worse.
They just deferred it.
There's no other precedent,
Yeah.
that has ever occurred. They deferred a, suspension to a year later,